again, everybody, and welcome to Tiger Sidelines. And whoa, do we have a lot to talk about. After a week off, we are back alongside Gabe DeArmond and Dave Matter. I'm Bo Bayman. Thanks, as always, for joining us. And we're going to take you back in the time machine to the SEC tournament. Before we last joined you, the Tigers knew that they would play Georgia. They went on to win that game. We said they needed to win a game at the SEC tournament. They did that, beating Georgia 73-70, and then falling to number 8 Arkansas in the quarterfinals by 6 points, 70-64. So at the SEC tournament, the Tigers did kind of what you thought they needed to do, Dave, to get maybe a 6-7 seed, which we'll talk about here in a second.
Yeah, I thought so because they beat Georgia. And then, the way that Arkansas was trending, you didn't figure that would really hurt them losing to Arkansas because it's also a team they've already beat on the road, no less. So, yeah, I came out of there thinking, they can probably avoid that 8-9, spot for sure. There's no certainties, obviously, but I felt pretty good. Not so much about a 6, but a 7 sounded good, and maybe a 6 if things rolled right. So, obviously, that did not work out that way for Missouri on Sunday.
No, it did not. And then the seeds were revealed, Gabe, and I think everybody was shocked that Missouri was seeded so low.
Yeah, it was. Most people were. You had a handful of fans who said, good, that's what they deserved. And, because they played bad down the stretch. And actually, as it turns out, maybe those people were correct. But a 9 was a little low. But once you start to get into that kind of 7, 8, 9, 10 range, it's splitting hairs. I thought they should have been. I thought they probably should have gotten Florida's spot, and Florida probably should have gotten their spot, to be honest. But, not a huge disservice or anything like that. Missouri did certainly put itself in that position to some extent.
It's the old adage, Dave. If you're going to be on the 7, 8, 9, 10, you want to be a 7 or a 10 rather than the 8 or 9. In this case, it didn't matter. But that going in, you thought, boy, oh boy, in 9, they're going to have trouble because looming, if they beat Oklahoma, was going to be Gonzaga, which everybody knows is probably them and Baylor. Between those two, the odds-on favorite to win the whole thing.
And for sure, and you're probably not going to get a rematch with Illinois. So you knew you were going to be up against it once and obviously Gonzaga was shown on the line before the 8-9 teams were. And you would have liked to at least get a chance to, have a day to prepare for Gonzaga and be on the big stage there against them. Back to the seeding, though, I think one thing, we can make a case whether Missouri was seeded wrong or not. They've got to figure out what they really are looking for, because they said the reason Loyola was an 8 instead of a 5 or 6 was because they didn't have enough quad 1 wins. Well, then why was Missouri an 8? Because they had as many as anybody, and 9 and 4 against teams in the field. So it just seemed like things were inconsistent with how they see things. And like Gabe said, in the end, Missouri probably was around an 8 seed, but it didn't seem that way, at least going into the tournament.
So the Tigers get this number 9 seed, and they play in the West region, and they play against the 8 seed Oklahoma. It's a good back and forth game. It's one of those games where really nobody gets out too much either way. Missouri went out early. Oklahoma was up most of the second half, if not all of the second half. The Tigers end up losing 72-68. They had the ball with a chance to tie down 3, really botched that possession, but it's almost a culmination of the entire season in that basketball game where they start strong, have a little bit of trouble, and end up losing.
Yeah, it was the game you expected. We told people don't even turn it on till the last TV timeout because the first 35 minutes, it doesn't matter what happens. It's going to be a 1-possession game. And it was. I think the whole thing was played in a 15-point window. I think Missouri's biggest lead was 7. OU's was 8. They're very evenly matched teams, and it came down to one thing. They both got pretty good efforts from their top 2 players, and Oklahoma's third player was Elijah Harkless, and I thought he won the game because Missouri didn't really have a third player in that game. Mark Smith started out well, but then it kind of fell apart after that.
Yeah, Mark Smith started hot, but then you didn't see him after that. And I thought they needed to feed him the ball a little bit more, or he needed to take more shots.
Yeah, he's not a guy that really creates his own shots. So his production is really based on if they get him the ball, and they really didn't. He was only 3 of 5 from 3. And that's the one time, lately where he's actually hitting from three and then he wasn't getting the ball back. So yeah, it didn't flow very well. I thought Tillman, I thought it was his best game since he came back from the 2-game leave of absence. I thought he deserved better in that game, the way he played. He was so physical and he left everything on the floor for sure. And then rough first half for Drew Smith, but I mean, he's the reason they're in the game with a minute to go because he just kind of put it on his shoulders there. And so, yeah, you can't find any fault with the way he played. There's another guard who wasn't great in that game. We may talk about a little bit on the show too, that didn't quite show up in Indianapolis.
Yeah, no doubt about it. And Gabe, I watched your post-game session and everybody wanted to talk about why was Drew Buggs playing instead of Xavier Pinson, as Pinson found himself with maybe 4 minutes in the second half?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it was 4 minutes in the second half, and there became a point. I know Dave was there and saw X wearing his warm-ups for the last 5 minutes or so. I mean, there became a point where it was pretty obvious. And, it's not like Pinson was playing well, right? I mean, he had 2 points in that game, maybe 3 points. I mean, he didn't do a lot, but he's capable of scoring. And you're down 8 points with 3 minutes left. You need guys who can score. Drew Buggs wasn't bringing you back to win that game, so I think there's fair points on both sides. Ultimately, the coach gets to decide who plays. And, I thought that crystallized. Dave and I have been saying for 12 months, he's not coming back next year. And if anybody thought he was coming back next year after that game, I'm not sure what they were paying attention to.
Yeah, and so then we find out later, before we wrap up the game, we find out later that X is entering the transfer portal. He'll play somewhere else next year. And again, not a real big surprise, especially with the latter part of the season and especially that last game went, Dave.
Yeah, and it's not just his offense, it's his defense, which doesn't show up very often. Certainly didn't in that game, but bad body language a lot of the year when they were losing. I mean, he was fine when they were winning for the most part. And, I thought Konzo was pretty candid after every game or going into a game. You'd ask him, well, what do you guys need more from Pinson? And he sounded like a broken record because it was just the same thing. And so you had a player who was kind of going off script and I don't think he was really playing to his strengths. And I don't think the staff did either. So they weren't on the same page. And ultimately it's up to both sides to make that work. And neither did. So I don't think we can just sit here and point to one side, say it's their fault or their fault. It wasn't working out. And big picture, the guys had some issues with the coaches. We know that he still played 3 years. He still played almost 2,000 minutes at Missouri. So I don't think you can say this was a failure. He played more than most college basketball players do on one team. So it just didn't work out to where he was going to finish his time at Missouri. And that's not unique in today's game.
And Gabe, you said back to the Oklahoma game, they needed a third guy. Mark Smith started hot. Kobe Brown had glimpses. I thought Mitchell Smith was pretty non-existent. And that's where the problem was. They couldn't get anybody else. And it seems like as I watched the entire first weekend of games, it seemed like somebody was getting hot for every team that ended up winning. And that just didn't happen for Missouri.
Yeah, I mean, Drew Smith did get hot there at the end. But yeah, this team in the end, like it shouldn't have been a surprise. They just didn't have enough. They had, I mean, they're trying to make a comeback from down 8 in the second half of an NCAA tournament game. And Mitchell Smith and Drew Buggs are the guys coming off the bench. And it's not disrespectful to those guys, but those are not starting level players on a team that can do damage in the NCAA tournament. When Pinson, Drew, and Tillman all played well and Mark Smith and Kobe were decent, that was a good team. But when any of those things didn't happen, they slipped to be average or below pretty quickly.
Yeah, no doubt about it. Now, Xavier Pinson's leaving. 5 seniors eligible to leave. I guess they could come back, but I don't think that any one of them are coming back, Dave.
No, there's no expectation internally at this point. I mean, I guess something could always change with one of those guys, but right now Missouri does not expect those guys to come back. And I don't think you're going to see many of these, what we're calling super seniors, come back for college basketball. It's just, they got a full season in, they got the tournament in. I think there's just more of a sense of closure with seniors in basketball than what we saw with football.
So we'll see what happens next year, but now you're leaning on Kobe Brown, maybe Parker Brown. There's been some rumblings that, he's not happy. So holy cow, next year, I mean, it's a complete rebuild.
The only guys I'm positive are going to be on this roster next year are Javon Pickett and Kobe Brown. That's it. I mean, Parker Brown, who knows? Torrance Watson, who knows? Ed Chang, Jordan Wilmore, who knows? I mean, some people wonder if Ed Chang is a real human being that exists because we didn't see him. So, I mean, you could really be looking at bringing back 2 guys, and that's, I mean, there are teams that do that, but they're usually coached by John Calipari, and they're doing it because 6 guys went in the first round of the NBA draft. I mean, and this is what kind of lingered in the background all year. Every loss seemed to hurt a little bit more because everybody was like, but what if we're really bad next year and everybody's gone, and I hated dealing with it every day during the season, but also I kind of understood it because I think these guys will probably get through spring break before they make a decision, unlike Pinson, but maybe not. But you really could be looking at the roster a couple weeks from today being Brown, Pickett, and 5 freshmen, and then who knows?
And to be fair, Dave, you've said this many times. They're high on the guys coming in.
Yeah, they are naturally. I mean, of course, they're going to be publicly. I don't know if they're high enough to think, okay, we just plug these guys in and go compete in the SEC. Most freshmen outside of the McDonald's All-American type that, by the way, aren't coming to Missouri, need some time to figure things out. So, yeah, they're going to be high on them, but I don't know if you expect them to play 20 minutes and be productive. If there's ever a year for a roster rebuild, and it's not just Missouri, it's this year where you're going to be able to get transfers without having to have them sit out. So that swings both ways, though. That could be more of an incentive for a guy like Torrance Watson or Parker Brown to go somewhere and play right away. And it works the other way where you can bring somebody in and don't have to sit them for a year. So they're not going to be the only team dealing with this, but they're the only team that Cuonzo Martin cares about dealing with it. It's going to be a challenge.
Yeah, no doubt about it. And from what I've been told, the transfer portal is like just filling with guys every single day, and it's going to be more full than it's ever been, Gabe.
Yeah, and it really is. That has become the spring recruiting period that used to be held back for, JUCOs and guys who hadn't made decisions. This is really now transfer season, and it's for everybody. And, I don't know, you don't necessarily want to completely rely on it, but it is a part of high major basketball recruiting. I mean, mid-majors have become kind of farm teams. Like when you're a mid-major and you get in the tournament, you better do something, because if you don't, your best player might be headed off to, Gonzaga or Florida State or wherever else the next year.
So the Tigers finished 16-10, 8-8 in the SEC. Let's quickly talk about the women, who really had a disappointing finish in the WNIT. They're playing in the first round against Fresno State. They're up 20 points with 15 minutes to go in that game. They end up losing, and then they play another game in this weird WNIT thing where they play Arizona State the next day and lose that one. And the women finished the year 9-13, 5-9. Of course, they had the early COVID problems. They had the late COVID problems because, if I'm not mistaken, Haley Frank missed the WNIT. But still, this is 2 really underachieving years in a row for Robin Pinchton.
Yeah, it really is. And I almost thought, now Robin was really positive going to this WNIT, so they had this great week of practice and they were playing better than they had all year. I kind of figured they had a better chance at winning a game in the NCAA tournament, because there was a team that got up for bigger games this year, not unlike the men, to where you go down to the WNIT and you get these teams, and it's all based on, do you care or not? It's like playing in a mid-tier bowl game on a Wednesday afternoon in Nashville. Like, do you care to be there or not? And they appeared to care when they're up 20, but after that, you just kind of lose your motivation, especially when it's a double elimination. In the back of your mind, you think, hey, we got a chance tomorrow to get in the consolation. So a funky tournament. I don't think, Robin should be really measured by what they did in the WNIT. It's more about the big picture. And and we've said this all year, this sets up for a really pivotal year for her next year. You got to show some results here.
Especially with the players they'll have coming back, because they'll have a lot back next year. Okay, let's take a break. When we come back, we'll check your tweets. A little bit later on, we'll talk spring football plus the wrestling team at the NCAA tournament. You're watching Tiger Sidelines right here on MC22. Welcome back, everyone. This is Tiger Sidelines alongside Dave Matter and Gabe DeArmond. I'm Bo Bayman. Thanks, as always, for joining us here. And we always say thank you for all the tweets that we get. We got a couple this week. Our first one comes to us from Dan, who says, after a year where there wasn't much high school or AAU basketball being played, should Mizzou basketball focus more on recruiting transfers in the next couple of seasons?
I mean, I don't think it has anything to do with this year. I think that's how it is. I mean, you're going to have you've got to hold a spot for at least one every year, and if not more than that, and people don't get as excited about transfers, but these are guys that have proven they can play on this level, which not even a 5-star kid in high school necessarily has.
Yeah. And there was something, was it yesterday, the day before, about a kid from Green Bay looking at Missouri?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, good shooting guard. Not much of a, as far as 3-point shooting, not great, 28%. But a guy that he's got
right in.
He's got, yeah, that's true. He's got connections at Konzo. He played for Link Darner at Green Bay, who was a teammate of Konzo's at Purdue. So you got to think there's a little bit of a connection there. But remember, it wasn't too long ago when Frank Haith brought in some really high-profile transfers, and Missouri was like, "Oh, wow, transfer you. This is their shortcut they're taking." Now that's what everyone's doing, and you have to, because it's just kind of the culture of the players now, that you don't see guys stick around for 4 years, so you have to adapt. You either don't adapt and you get fired, or you adapt and you try to figure it out for yourself.
Well, you guys know I've been saying for 8 years Frank Haith was ahead of the game, man.
There you go.
He still is at Tulsa. That's right. Hey, Jason wants to know, Missouri baseball is playing with a lot of freshmen, even with players that came back for a 5th season. Should that give us hope for a breakthrough in the next 1 to 2 years?
What's a breakthrough for Missouri baseball? Making the tournament? I mean, this league, pretty much everybody but Missouri starts the season hoping for the College World Series, to be honest with you. And this is just, I don't know. I hate to give the same answer every single time, but the appetite's just not here for that sport. And look, you can do, somebody asked me earlier this week, hey, should Missouri just maybe cut some attention and spending on basketball and go all in on football because it's the SEC? I said, if you want to come in the SEC and just try to do what everybody else is doing and beat them that way, it's probably not going to work. I'd actually spend more on basketball because half the league doesn't care, and you do. But baseball, I don't know. There's a ceiling to what Missouri can do in this league.
And baseball has it tough. I checked the rankings this week. The top 5 teams in the country are all from the SEC.
Right.
And this week, Missouri plays the number 1 team in Vanderbilt, weather permitting. But, I mean, they're 1-2. They went 1-2 against Kentucky, had to come from behind for their lone win. They're in store for just a really tough year, I think.
They are. I talked to Steve Beezer this week, and he's really disappointed with the pitching. And they've got this freshman class of pitchers that they project to all be starters eventually. They're just not ready yet, but their veterans haven't been very good. So they're thinking about moving some of these freshmen into starting roles at some point. The lineup just hasn't been very good either. I mean, they're last in the SEC in just about every hitting category, definitely last in every pitching category. The whole thing that they focused on this year was, hey, got to win these non-conference games so that way can balance out if they lose some SEC series. And turns out they lost the non-conference games right off the bat, and they're really playing from behind at this point.
Yeah, no doubt about it. We'll talk about them a little bit more, along with softball plus spring football and wrestling, when we come back. You're watching Tiger Sidelines right here on NC22. Welcome back, everybody. This is Tiger Sidelines. Dave Matter, Gabe DeArmond. I'm Bo Bayman. Let's talk a little wrestling. Wrestling went to St. Louis to the NCAA championships with all 10 wrestlers in the lineup. And to say they were disappointed with 7th place would be an understatement. They thought they were going to be on the podium. They underperformed at nationals despite getting a 6th straight top 10 finish in the country. Brian Smith's program, a little, I guess they were a little crushed coming out of that weekend just because they had 2 5th place finishers, Brock Mahler and Rocky Elam, and a 3rd place finisher in Keegan O'Toole, but they were expecting much, much higher going into St. Louis. They had a little bit of a crowd there. As I said, Keegan O'Toole third at 165, Brock Mahler fifth at 149, Rocky Elam fifth at 197. The whole team will be back next year, but this to me, and you guys know this from the 10,000-foot view, this to me is the problem with wrestling in the MAC rather than potentially in the Big 12 or some other conference, to where I'm not sure they're seasoned enough when they have to take on these tournaments against wrestlers from the Big 10 and other power wrestling conferences.
Yeah, the answer here is all of them. And the question is, how many programs would be thrilled with a 7th place national finish? And I understand, like, being disappointed. It's okay. They thought they were going to be higher, all that. But, I mean, like you said, 6 straight years in the top 10. I've got a hard time calling this a disappointing program that Brian's got going.
It is. That's true. And Brian, that's how hard he is on himself. You know, he's like, hey, we wanted to win. Iowa had a great weekend, and they ended up winning the national championship. As we switch gears now, let's go to the spring football game, which you guys, well, Gabe, you got to see, didn't you?
Well, I saw a spring football get together. I would not call what I saw a spring football game, but there was an event that involved spring football. Yes.
Yeah. Your thoughts?
Well, there were some drills, and then there was some 2-hand touch, and then there were some 3rd and 4th stringers playing scrimmage for about 20 minutes. So, I mean, the lead sentence of what I wrote after that was, anybody who tells you they could learn anything from today is lying. You know, I mean, I wasn't going to pretend that was anything other. And I appreciated Eli Drinkwitz afterward saying, hey, this was not meant to be like a scrimmage that was going to entertain people, that people could figure out a lot about. We're trying to stay healthy, and we're trying to get better and have a practice.
That was the number one goal, probably, is just stay healthy, right, Dave?
Yeah, and it's not good for us that are out there covering and trying to write something interesting, but I kind of credit Eli Drinkwitz for not making spring football like the end all be all most important thing that ever is going to happen for this team. It's a chance to get out there and refresh these guys with the playbook so they don't completely forget it by August. Stay healthy, you know, just get guys moving around, get a look at some new guys, get a look at guys that are going to step in for new roles, and then just get it over with and then move on to other important things. I can't recall any teams that won championships where they say in, you know, December, January, like, gosh, remember that spring practice we had on March 4th? That's really was the reason we won this thing this year. So yeah, I like the way you did it. Don't drag it out for 7 weeks. It's just not that important.
Moving on, number 23, Gymnastics recorded its highest ever Southeastern Conference championship score. They finished 6th with a 196.125, and they made the NCAA regional, where they'll go to Tuscaloosa on Friday, April 2nd at 7 p.m. This is the 6th consecutive NCAA regional appearance and the 30th overall in program history. This is a team, I know that we poke our fun every week, but they are consistently now, to me, getting into the 196s when, you know, years ago they were in the 194. So despite being in the SEC, they are getting better as a program and more consistent.
Yes,
Dave.
That's true. This is one of those sports too, where it just doesn't, you know, what the competition doesn't matter as much because you're not really competing against them. It's just about getting those scores up. And yeah, they're doing a nice job. It's a brutal conference, but this is one where you don't hear, you know, Missouri making excuses for being in the SEC. Oh, it's so tough, we can't compete there. They just go out there and do, and they seem to get better all the time. So credit to Shannon and his team.
Number 18 softball went 4-0 at the Mizzou tournament, beating Kent State, Iowa State, and Drake twice. Then they played at Georgia in the SEC opener, went 1-2, won the first game, and then lost the next two, including the last one 8-7. They've won 2 midweek games over Western Illinois. They're 22-6 overall. They host Auburn for 3 games this weekend. They're on track to probably make the NCAA tournament now. However, they're going to have to get some more SEC wins.
Yeah, I think you covered it. I agree. Good analysis.
You're welcome. We mentioned baseball went 4-1 last week. They beat SLU. They beat Illinois State. Then they went 1-2 at Kentucky. They have number 1 Vanderbilt for 3 starting Thursday evening. And volleyball lost 2 at Florida, then swept 2 at Mississippi State. Mizzou is now 15-7 on the season. And I think, if I'm not mistaken, this could have been it. Was this the end of the regular season today?
They either have one more match or that was it. So I'm
and they're still going to have a tournament, right?
Yes. They're still got the postseason going on.
It seems like they should take another break before that and just have that in like August.
You never know. They might. Let's go back before we end this, and let's go back to the NCAA men's tournament. How surprised are you with what we've seen with Oral Roberts still alive, Illinois gone already? I mean, it's been a shocking tournament as far as brackets go.
It's been incredible. I have 4 teams alive on one side, and the other side I can get like one more game right, I think. I mean, it's just I think it's a combination of 2 things. It's a weird season, right? And also, seriously, thank you, FBI, for maybe leveling the playing field out here. I mean, I watched that Kansas team play twice, and they're not all that good. Kentucky's not even here. Duke's not here. Michigan State lost in the first round. I mean, I think the biggest disappointment is probably Will Wade, because like that's an expensive Sweet 16 he bought over the last 4 years. So, but I do think that you're kind of whistling past the graveyard if you don't acknowledge that part of it. And hey, guys maybe are going places they weren't going before, and the playing field's been a little bit leveled.
Yeah, this could still very well come down to Gonzaga and Baylor, the 1 and 2 teams all year long. And maybe then we forget a little bit about what happened the first 3 weeks. But I think it's been a joy to watch teams we don't normally get to see in this part of the country. I mean, I don't stay up late to watch many USC, UCLA games, but those teams have been a treat to watch. The Oregon State storyline, then all the mid-majors. It's been a great tournament. It is nice. We don't get this in college football. It's Ohio State, Clemson, and Alabama every year. This is the beauty of the bracket, is that you get to see these upsets and then really get to know these players and watch them and enjoy them.
And even if it is Gonzaga Baylor in the final, the story of this tournament is, Oral Roberts and Abilene Christian and teams like that. That's what we're going to remember from this tournament, not, Gonzaga going 32-0.
Yeah, no doubt about it. Loyola Chicago as well. So we'll see what happens, and we'll talk about it next week, because we'll have plenty of time to talk about who's coming back, who's not coming back, especially as Gabe mentioned. We'll see if there's some action during spring break or after spring break, but we'll talk about it on Tiger Sidelines. But we're out of time. So for Brian and Matt behind the scenes, for Dave Matter and Gabe DeArmond, I'm Bo Bayman. Thanks as always for watching Tiger Sidelines right here on MC22.